Once upon a time there was a rose and a toad. The rose bush on which the rose bloom grew in a small semicircular flower garden in front of the village house. The flower garden was very neglected. Weeds grew thickly over old flower beds embedded in the ground and along paths that had not been cleaned or sanded for a long time. A wooden lattice with pegs shaped like four-sided peaks, once painted with green oil paint, is now completely peeling, crumbling, and falling apart. The pikes were stolen by village boys to play soldiers, and in order to fend off an angry Barbosa with a group of other dogs, the peasants who approached the house. And the flower garden has become no worse from this destruction. The remains of the trellis were entwined with hops, a twig with large white flowers, and mouse polka dots hanging in whole pale green heaps, with pale purple tassels scattered here and there. The thorny thistles on the oily and moist soil of the flower garden. There was a large shady garden around it, reached such large sizes that they almost looked like trees. The yellow cowsheds raised their flower-studded arrows even higher than them. Nettles occupied an entire corner of the flower garden. It burned, of course, but you could admire its dark greenery from a distance, especially when this greenery served as a backdrop for a delicate and luxurious pale rose flower. It bloomed on a beautiful May morning when it opened its petals. The morning dew that flew away left a few clear, transparent tears on them. Rosa was definitely crying, but everything was so good around her, so clean and clear on this beautiful morning. When she saw the blue sky for the first time and felt the fresh morning breeze and the rays of the shining sun penetrating her delicate petals with pink light, it was so peaceful and calm in the flower garden that if she could really cry, it's not out of grief, but out of happiness to live. She couldn't speak. She could only bow her head and pour out a subtle and fresh scent around her, and this scent was her words, tears, and prayer. And down below, between the roots of a bush, on the damp earth, as if sticking to it with a flat belly, sat a rather fat old toad, which hunted for worms and midges all night, and in the morning sat down to rest from its labors, choosing a place more shaded and moist. She sat with her toad's eyes covered with webbing, and breathed barely noticeably, puffing at her dirty gray, warty and sticky sides and putting one ugly paw aside. She was too lazy to move it to her belly. She wasn't happy about the morning, the sun, or the good weather. She was already full and ready to rest. But when the breeze died down for a minute and the scent of the rose did not drift away, the toad felt it, and this caused her vague concern. However, she was lazy for a long time to look where this smell was coming from. No one had been to the flower garden where the rose grew and the toad sat for a long time. Last fall, on the very day when the toad, having found a good crack under one of the foundation stones of the house, was going to hibernate there, a little boy came into the flower garden for the last time, who spent the whole summer sitting in it every clear day under the window of the house. A grown-up girl, his sister, was sitting by the window. She was reading a book or sewing something and occasionally glanced at her brother. He was a little boy of about 7, with big eyes and a big head on a skinny body. He was very fond of his flower garden. It was his flower garden, because almost no one else went to this abandoned place. And when he came to it, he sat down in the sun on an old wooden bench that stood on a dry sandy path that had survived near the house itself, because they went to close the shutters on it, and he began to read the book he had brought with him. "Vasya, do you want me to throw you a ball?" my sister asked from the window. "Maybe you can run with him." "No, Moshe, I'd rather do this, with a book." And he sat for a long time and read. And when he got tired of reading about Robinsons and wild countries and sea robbers, he left his book open and climbed into the thicket of the flower garden. He knew every bush and almost every stalk here. He squatted down in front of a thick mullein stem surrounded by shaggy whitish leaves, which was 3 times taller than he was, and watched for a long time as the ant people ran after their grass aphid cows. As the ant delicately touched the thin tubes sticking out of the aphids on their backs and picked up clean droplets of sweet liquid that showed on the tips of the tubes, he watched a dung beetle busily and diligently dragging its ball somewhere like a spider, spreading a cunning rainbow net, guarding flies, like a lizard, opening its blunt muzzle, sitting in the sun, shining with the green shields of its back. And once, in the evening, he saw a live hedgehog. Here, too, he could not restrain his joy and almost screamed and clapped his hands. But fearing to frighten the prickly animal, he held his breath and, opening his happy eyes wide, watched in delight as he sniffed at the roots of the rosebush with his picky snout, looking for worms between them, and ridiculously fingered his fat paws, similar to bearish ones. "Vasya, darling, go home. It's getting damp," my sister said loudly. And the hedgehog, frightened by the human voice, quickly pulled a prickly fur coat over his forehead and on his hind legs and turned into a ball. The boy gently touched its thorns. The animal shrank even more and puffed loudly and hurriedly, like a small steam engine. Then he got to know this hedgehog a little bit. He was such a weak, quiet, and meek boy that even the various little animals seemed to understand this and soon got used to him. What a joy it was when the hedgehog tasted the milk from the saucer brought by the owner of the flower garden. This spring, the boy could not go out to his favorite corner. His sister was still sitting next to him, but no longer by the window. But by his bedside she was reading a book, not for herself, but aloud to him. Because it was difficult for him to lift his emaciated head from the white pillows, and it was difficult for him to hold even the smallest volume in his skinny hands, and his eyes were quickly closing. They got tired of reading. He must never go out to his favorite corner again. "Mashe!" Suddenly he whispers to his sister. "What, honey? Is kindergarten okay now? Have the roses bloomed?" His sister bends down, kisses his pale cheek, and at the same time imperceptibly wipes away a tear. "Very well, my dear, very well. And the roses bloomed. We'll go there together on Monday. The doctor will let you out." The boy doesn't answer and takes a deep breath. The nurse starts reading again. "It will be all ready. I'm tired. I'd rather sleep." The nurse adjusted the pillows and the white blanket for him, and with difficulty he turned to the wall and fell silent. The sun shone through the window overlooking the flower garden, and threw bright rays on the bed and on the little body lying on it, illuminating the pillows and blanket and gilding the short-cropped hair and thin neck of the child. The rose did not know any of this. It grew and showed off the next day. It was supposed to bloom in full bloom, and on the third it began to wither and crumble. That's the whole pink life. But even in this short life, she had experienced a lot of fear and grief. A toad noticed her. When she saw the flower for the first time with her evil and ugly eyes, something strange stirred in the toad's heart. She couldn't tear herself away from the delicate rose petals and stared and stared. She really liked the rose. She felt a desire to be closer to such a fragrant and beautiful creature. And to express her tender feelings, she couldn't think of anything better than these words. "Wait," she croaked, "I'll eat you up." Rosa shuddered. Why was it attached to its stem? The free birds that chirped around her jumped and flew from branch to branch. Sometimes they flew away somewhere far away, where Rosa did not know. The butterflies were also free. How she envied them. If she had been like them, she would have fluttered up and flown away from the evil eyes that pursued her with their gaze. Rosa did not know that toads sometimes lie in wait for butterflies. "I'll eat you up," the toad repeated, trying to speak as gently as possible, which came out even more terrible, and crawled closer to the rose. "I'll eat you up," she repeated, still looking at the flower. And the poor creature was horrified to see how her nasty sticky paws were clinging to the branches of the bush on which she grew. However, it was difficult for the toad to climb. Its flat body could crawl and jump freely only on flat ground. After each effort, she looked up where the flower was swinging, and the rose froze. "Oh, my God! If only I could die another death," she prayed. And the toad kept climbing higher. But where the old trunks ended and the young branches began, she had to suffer a little. The dark green smooth bark of the rose bush was covered with sharp and strong thorns. The toad split its paws and belly on them and, covered in blood, fell to the ground. She looked at the flower with hatred. "I said I'd eat you up," she repeated. Evening came. It was necessary to think about dinner, and the wounded toad trudged off to lie in wait for unwary insects. Anger did not stop her from stuffing herself, as always her scratches were not very dangerous, and she decided, after resting, to get back to the flower that attracted her and hated her. She rested for quite a long time. Morning came, noon passed. Rose almost forgot about her enemy. She was already in full bloom and was the most beautiful creature in the flower garden. There was no one to admire her. The little master lay motionless on his bed. His sister did not leave his side and did not show herself at the window. Only birds and butterflies scurried around the rose, and bees, buzzing, sometimes landed in its open corolla and flew out, completely shaggy from the yellow flower dust. A nightingale flew in, climbed into a rosebush, and sang its song. How different it was from the wheezing of a toad. Rosa listened to this song and was happy. It seemed to her that the nightingale was singing for her, or maybe it was true. She didn't see her enemy climbing the branches unnoticed. This time the toad spared neither its paws nor its belly. Blood covered it, but it bravely climbed up, and suddenly, amidst the sonorous and gentle rumble of the nightingale, Rosa heard a familiar wheezing. I said I'd eat it, and I'll eat it. Toad eyes stared at her from a nearby branch. The evil animal had only one move left to grab the flower. Rosa realized that she was dying. The little master had been lying motionless on the bed for a long time. His sister, who was sitting in an armchair at the head of the bed, thought he was asleep. She had an open book on her lap, but she wasn't reading it. Little by little, her tired head drooped. The poor girl had not slept for several nights, not leaving her sick brother, and now she was dozing slightly. "Moshe," he whispered suddenly. The nurse roused herself. She dreamed that she was sitting by the window, that her little brother was playing, as last year, in a flower garden and calling her. When she opened her eyes and saw him in bed, thin and weak, she sighed heavily. "What's cute?" "Moshe, you told me that the roses have bloomed. Can I have one?" "You can, my dear, you can." She went to the window and looked out at the bush. There was a single, but very lush rose growing there. "Just for you, a rose has bloomed, and what a lovely one. Should I put it here on the table in a glass?" Yes, on the table. "I want to." The girl took a pair of scissors and went out into the garden. It had been a long time since she had left the room. The sun blinded her, and the fresh air made her feel slightly dizzy. She approached the bush at the very moment when the toad wanted to grab the flower. "Oh, how disgusting! Stop it!" she cried. And grabbing a branch, she shook it violently. The toad fell to the ground and flopped on its belly. In a rage, she jumped at the girl, but could not jump above the edge of the dress and immediately flew far away, thrown by the toe of a shoe. She did not dare to try again and only saw from afar how the girl carefully cut the flower and carried it into the room. When the boy saw his sister with a flower in her hand, he smiled faintly for the first time after a long time and with difficulty made a movement with his thin hand. "Give it to me," he whispered. "I'll smell it." His sister put the stem in his hand and helped him move it to his face. He inhaled the delicate scent and, smiling happily, whispered, "Oh, how good!" Then his face became serious and motionless, and he fell silent. Forever. The rose, although it was cut before it began to crumble, felt that it had been cut for a reason. It was placed in a separate glass by a small coffin. There were whole bouquets of other flowers, but to tell the truth, no one paid attention to them, and the young girl, when she put the rose on the table, brought it to her lips and kissed it. A small tear fell from her cheek onto the flower, and it was the best thing that happened in Rose's life. When it started to wither, they put it in a thick old book and dried it, and then, many years later, they gave it to me. That's why I know the whole story.